Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we're going to share true Christmas horror stories. First story. My Christmas tree is killing me. It's hard to believe that just a week ago, my Christmas tree stood tall and proud in the corner of my living room, bringing me so much joy. Now, I find myself wishing this damn tree had never been brought into my home. What few pine needles remain on it are brown, and its trunk is bent over, like an inflexible person reaching for their toes. My ornaments have scattered across the floor, but I don't have the strength to pick them up. I've been feeling really sick these past few days, and it's getting worse. Last week, I returned from work and found a post-it on my door. Used your shower. Left you a gift. Zoxoxo, Mom. My parents retired a few years ago and moved to a campground away from the city. It was nice and all, but they didn't have running water in the winter, so they occasionally stopped by to do laundry and to shower. When I opened the door, Rex, my Labrador, greeted me excitedly. I know, it's a really stereotypical name. In my defense, I got him when I was 9, and I was all about dinosaurs back then. I still am. I have an awesome T-Rex magnet on my fridge that isn't going anywhere. Rex was surprisingly spry for his old age, and I happily met his demands for attention. Running my hands over his soft black fur, I removed my coat and threw it in the general direction of the nearest hangar. Rex, tail wagging like a metronome on steroids, dragged me to the living room. I smiled as I saw the beautiful Christmas tree my parents had left me. Rex spread out under the tree on a white blanket that had been draped around it and playfully nibbled at the bottom branches. The next day, I put on some holiday music and dug through boxes to find my ornaments. Rex thought he'd help me by pulling out random objects and hiding them around my house. There was a sweet scent in the air, like nutmeg mixed with candle wax. I had likely failed to close the lid on one of the Christmas candles. The clumped-up sugar in my cupboard was proof of my lazy lid-closing ways. Rex was particularly fond of my new garlands and helped me unravel them all over the living room floor. It took me 15 minutes to undo all the knots. He loved watching me struggle. After finding a nice array of older ornaments from my childhood and newer ones I'd bought myself after moving out, I began decorating the tree. I remembered the year when I got Rex. He was sitting under the tree on Christmas Eve, wearing a big red bow. We've been friends ever since. As I continued to hang ornaments, I spotted a few yellowing pine needles. I carefully plucked them off and tossed them in the garbage. Their absence did not take away from the tree's splendor. After a while, I noticed Rex wasn't by my side anymore. I looked around my house and found him curled up on his doggy bed, which was pretty unusual in and of itself. I'd only seen him sleep there twice since I'd bought the thing. Rex much preferred the foot of my bed. All tuckered out, "Huh boy," I teased, scratching him behind the ear. He whined lowly and closed his eyes. I let him be, took a few moments to send my parents a thank you email with a photo of the decked out tree, and then started on supper. Before sitting down at the table, I opened a can of Rex's favorite food and poured it in his bowl. I called for him, but he didn't come. He was probably exhausted from the decorathon. I ate alone for the first time in years. The silence was deafening, but at least I could enjoy the view as I devoured my meal. My tree looked beautiful. I checked on Rex a few times that evening, but he was fast asleep. Lazy bum. My dad answered my email and told me they were canceling our plans for supper the next day because they'd come down with the flu. I gave them strict instructions to get some rest and then followed my own advice. I was starting to feel rather worn out myself. Over the course of the following days, I saw a steady decline in old Rex's health. I was afraid it was his time. I dreaded it so much that it gave me nightmares. I could barely keep myself from tearing up at work. We'd been through so much together, Rex and I. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I came home one night to find a collection of yellow and brownish pin needles under the tree. It was starting to thin out like the top of a middle-aged man's head. I vacuumed the mess, feeling really guilty for being unable to keep the damn tree alive. It was a gift after all. What would my parents say if they saw it in such a pitiful condition? I stopped in my tracks and realized I'd forgotten to greet Rex. I ran to his side and dropped to my knees. I didn't even have to touch him to know he was gone. My lips quivering and my eyes dripping, I gave him a final hug. "I'm sorry I wasn't here to say goodbye," I murmured. I had to call a friend to take care of him. I couldn't do it myself. The next few days passed in a blur. I was so distraught that I called in sick from work. It wasn't a complete lie, since I felt like I had caught what was ailing my parents. I emailed my dad to tell him about Rex. He loved that dog almost as much as I did. He liked to kidnap him for week-long camping trips. He claimed we had shared custody of him. Though my parents' laptops were typically at arm's reach, I didn't get a reply. Dad was probably moping around the campfire and needed his space. I coped by turning into a complete hermit, leaving the house only once to take out the trash and overflowing recycling bin. I can't remember why the recycling bin was so full. I don't recall putting much stuff into it. Meanwhile, my Christmas tree continued to decay. I was too much of a wreck and too worn down to bother taking it out to the dumpster. I let it rot slowly in my living room. Since yesterday, I've been getting these awful headaches and my nose keeps bleeding. I spent most of my time lying in bed or sitting in my computer. I wish Rex was here. I wish my parents would reply to my emails. I'm so lonely. I called the friend who took care of Rex for me, but she couldn't stay on the phone very long. Seems like I gave her my flu. I wish I wasn't looking at my pathetic excuse for a Christmas tree. It's slouched over, and there is not a single ornament left on it. Ugh, the screen's getting all blurry. I'm probably going to go to bed soon. As I was typing this, I heard a faint hissing sound coming from the tree. I lethargically wheeled my chair over and leaned in to listen. It was like the sound of air escaping a tire, and it was coming from a tiny black tube sticking out of the trunk. That's when I realized something. The tree had no scent. I should have been able to smell pine or rot or something. Anything. Then I remembered why the recycling bin had been so full. My mind was distracted when I took it out, but it was coming back to me. There had been a large crumpled-up cardboard box with a picture of a tree on it. Artificial Christmas trees aren't supposed to die. Oh man, I'm starting to feel really dizzy. I'm going to go lie down for a while. Second story. Merry Christmas. All throughout the few years that I spent with them, my biological parents had never had much involvement in my life. They never made an effort to do anything special for me. Each year on my birthday, I received nothing. Not so much as a simple happy birthday. And there was no cake either. I'd be surprised to find out that they had even known my birthday, for I doubt that they remembered the day that I was born. Still, you'd think that they would have some form of celebration. But no. I suppose some of this can be accredited to the fact that my father was an extreme alcoholic. Mixed with my mother's addiction to drugs, this made for quite the toxic cocktail. My parents even refused to celebrate the arguably most important holiday, yes, Christmas. So, until I began school, I had never even heard of this Santa Claus. The first time I heard of him, I was 4 years old. The other children and the teachers at the preschool that I attended spoke of him nonstop when the holiday season approached. It seemed like I was the only one there who hadn't the slightest idea of who he was. And so, I learned from my classmates. Some of the things I heard most often was that his hair was white as snow, and that he had a long beard to match. He dressed in white and red. He was always happy, blushy cheeks and a chubby body as well. Legend had it that on Christmas Eve, Santa stopped by every house in the world to deliver presents to the children who had been nice. But never the naughty ones. I remember the confusion I felt. Had I been naughty? For I had never gotten presents on Christmas before. I didn't understand. I would have to ask my father. Yes, he would have the answer. Unless, of course, they were oblivious to Santa Claus. The memory of me sitting on the cement sidewalk after school that day is so clear inside my mind. I waited for Daddy for about an hour, but that wasn't really unusual. He had a tendency to sleep in late, since most nights he stayed out until dawn drinking. Finally, he arrived. The car had such a strong aroma of liquor. But that was just another thing that wasn't unusual. That afternoon, Daddy had yelled at me. He told me to get in the car right that second, or he would leave me there to rot. It was clear he was drunk and grumpy. I decided to ask him about Santa Claus anyways. Daddy, why doesn't Santa Claus bring me presents? To this day, I remember the way he looked at me. His eyes were filled with hate and malice. Why do you ask such stupid questions? Good God, child, you should know the answer to that, he said to me, shaking his head in displeasure. Looking back, I should have known better than to ask him when he was in one of those moods. But still, I continued to push for an answer. I don't know. Why doesn't he come to our house, Daddy? This time he closed his eyes, gritted his teeth, and gave me an answer. Because he isn't real. There's your answer. Does that make you happy? I knew better than to say anything that time. I remember feeling my eyes water. Then it became full-blown crying. I never brought up St. Nick to my father again from that day on. Weeks passed as normal, with no mention of Santa from my parents. Surprise, surprise. Before I knew it, there was only 1 week until Christmas Eve. I begged each and every night before I went to bed for Santa to come. I was hopeful. I was counting on him. Every waking moment was spent thinking about the toys that he would bring me. I daydreamed about the night that he would finally stop by my house. My mother read my enthusiasm and, in a time of sobriety, assisted me in baking chocolate chip cookies alongside a glass of warm milk for Santa. It was so impossible to sleep that night. I didn't want to go to sleep. I wanted to see Santa. That way I could brag to all the other children that I had seen him, and they had not. My plan came crashing down when my mother told me that he would only come if I was sleeping. Hesitantly, I dozed off, only to be awoken just 2 hours later by thudding footsteps and creaking floorboards. Sitting up in bed, I glanced at the clock, which read 3:26 a.m. Who was awake at this type of hour? Naturally, I would have assumed it was my dad. But it wasn't, for once he had gotten home and inside his bed at a reasonable hour. I decided to investigate. Slowly, I crept out of my bed. Quiet as I could, I tiptoed to my doorway, peeking out into the living room on the first floor. All of the lights in the room were out, and the room appeared empty. Eerie. I continued to stare out into the darkness. In a way, it was entrancing. It was like a dark and vacant void. After several minutes of searching the room and finding nothing, I retreated to the comfort of my bed. I spent a while tossing and turning, trying to fall back asleep. Suddenly, I heard these voices. Voices that were coming from inside the house. These voices were not those of my parents. I wasn't able to place them. My first thought was Santa, but I saw the flashing lights. The voices came from something much less exciting. They were coming from the television. Who turned it on? And who was watching TV? At that hour? Once again, I decided I should examine the room. The bright lights from the screen allowed me to see the silhouette of what seemed to be a man sitting on the couch. I could see only the back of his head. He wore a stocking cap. It was red. I looked at this strange man, and I was scared. There was an intruder. I needed my mommy and daddy. I stood in front of their door, holding back tears. I turned the handle. Locked. I thought of banging on the door, but that would only draw attention. He would hear, and he would hurt me. I would go to the neighbors for help, but that would mean using the front door in the living room. It didn't faze me. I would find another way to escape. I would get help. Tiptoeing across the floor, I headed for the bathroom. There was a window there, and if I was lucky, I would get out uninjured. It was only a 2-story drop. All of a sudden, the wood from below me let out a loud creak. The sound echoed. I can tell you that when somebody's watching you, you can feel it. You can feel their eyes looking at you. I turned my head and my eyes met his. His face was awful, his features deformed. He had a long white beard, just like they said that he would. But they didn't warn me about his skin. His skin was red. It looked so thick and dark. Its texture resembled that of a reptile, leathery. A hue of sky blue were his eyes, though it was obvious that they were not normal. They looked hazy and glazed over. Back then, I didn't understand. How could somebody look like that? But I know now that he was a burn victim. That fire got him good. His whole face was painful to look at. Santa Claus is a monster, I thought to myself. As our eyes met, a sickly grin fell upon his face. His smile didn't look human. Bits of flesh were stuck between each of those yellow teeth. My entire body trembled. Panicking, I rushed into my room and slammed the door behind me. There was a loud slam. Crawling into bed, I pulled the covers up over my face, revealing only my eyes. Moments of silence passed. Then creak, creak, creak. Each time, the creaks got louder. All of a sudden, creak. I could hear it just outside my room, and I tensed up. The next creak was not on the floor. Instead, the creak was at my door. Slowly, gently, he opened my door. Shivering, I managed to spit out a single word, Santa. The creature smiled that sickly smirk once more. Then he laughed. The laugh wasn't evil, but it chilled me to my bones. It almost sounded childish. Yeah, it resembled the laugh of a little boy. He didn't appear to be moving or doing anything. Motionless, the monster stood there. I could see then that he dressed in red and white. They were blood-stained clothes. Slowly, his grin faded. Taking its place was a more serious expression. And then he walked away. Creak, creak, creak. They became quieter each time they occurred, and after a while, there was no creak at all. Whoever this man was, he didn't mean harm to me, or he would have murdered me then and there. So, I decided to rest. Exhaustion overtook me, and so I gave in. I woke up at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, ready to begin the celebration. The door to my parents' room was now unlocked and wide open. I jumped on their bed shouting, "Mommy, Daddy, Santa came! Santa came! I bet he brought gifts." Nothing. No movement. I lifted the covers, and what I found is truly gruesome. That day marked the very early loss of my childhood innocence. I was only 4 years old. Under the covers were my parents' corpses. The scene was in no way a pleasant one. Both of their bodies had been so cut up. Internal organs were removed. There were so many cuts on their skin. Between them, there were 2 boxes. Both were shaped like hearts, wrapped with silver ribbons. It was some kind of sick, ironic joke. Each box contained a heart. A real, human heart. Both of them had green ribbon tied around their chests. On my father, there was a note tied down. It read, "Dear Taylor, you have been very nice this year, and not at all naughty, although I have been quite naughty. I hope you enjoyed your present. Merry Christmas. Love, Santa Claus." After my parents' untimely death, I was sent to live with my grandparents. They're the ones who raised me. However, I now am of legal age and I live alone. I decided to share this story because I saw Santa again. Recently, my neighbors were brutally murdered. When the police got there was hardly anything left of the body. All the flesh had been removed. They lived right across the street from me. I could see into their rooms at night. Well, instead of them in the window, I see his face. He looks at me and he smiles and waves. He hasn't changed. He looks just as he did 17 years ago. I wanted presents. I wanted Santa Claus. I never wanted this. Third story. This one thing forever changed Christmas for me. Who are you? I slurred, trying to sound intimidating as I propped myself up in bed. Of course, I was wearing nothing but Frosty the Snowman boxers, so I wouldn't have presented much of a threat if I rolled out of the sheets to confront the intruder in my bedroom. He snapped his fingers and my lamp turned on. My blood turned to ice. The fuck did you do that? What are you? He stepped into the lamplight, bells on his curly shoes jingling. What do you think I am? He asked, indicating his pointy ears. You look kind of like an elf, I answered, rubbing my eyes. He folded his arms over his red and green striped shirt. Kind of? Sure, we'll go with that. Look, Clement Dash, how did you know my name? I interrupted. You're on the list. He rubbed his temple. In fact, you're on the list you'd rather not be on. My mouth went dry. None of this seemed possible. It sounds like you're actually talking about Santa's naughty list. He stared at me in disappointment. Is this because, I kind of jerked off on Christmas? He stared at me in disappointment. What do you want from me? I asked, pulling the covers up to my chin. Have you ever been scared in your own house? That's the purest form of terror. Your home should be the last bastion of security. When that isn't safe, the world is a dark place indeed. I followed the intruder out of my bedroom and into the hall, every hair on the back of my neck standing on edge. I had no idea what to expect, but each situation I imagined was horrifying. I turned the corner, and my stomach turned to ice. A long, black leg was sticking out of the chimney, shining in the moonlight. A cloven hoof was attached where a foot should have been. I leapt back and crashed against the lamp, sending it clattering to the floor. It's going to take more than that to wake him, the intruder grunted. I teetered on the edge of hyperventilation. Is that Dash? Krampus, yes, he explained, folding his arms. I nodded, not understanding. The elf lit a cigarette and sighed. I don't allow smoking in my house. You don't allow medieval Germanic mythological beings into your house either. But here we are, he sighed, blowing a stream of smoke. All right, so, wait, what's your name? To pronounce it correctly, I'd have to rip out your tongue. Call me Creature. Right, I answered. What's my role in all of this? He took one long drag of the cigarette and looked at the thing like it was his only friend. Santa knows when you're sleeping, knows when you're awake, basically stalks the fuck out of you, right? He gives coal to the bad kids. That really hit children hard when their parents had died of black lung. F up, right? See, the original story of Saint Nick is that he worked with Krampus. I mean, it's really on the nose. Old Nick and Saint Nick anagramming Santa. Then one day, everyone just assumed that Santa took care of both lists, so it kind of became unnecessary to keep up the ruse. I wanted to puke. You're saying that a demon has been spying on me my whole life? Creature put his hands on his hips. And recording your behavior before creeping around your house for years. Honestly, I don't know how more people aren't freaked out by this. A chill ran down my spine. So why are you telling me all of this now? He took another long pull from his cigarette. The boss got knocked. I was already at my wit's end. I just wanted the demon leg out of my chimney. I don't understand. Creature pulled out a flask, took a large swig, and wiped his tiny mouth. Do you have any idea how difficult the past 2 years have been? 1,913 different doctors and nurses have received geese that shit actual gold. Those are extremely difficult to produce in a workshop. On the other hand, we've dug up enough coal to alter the world's supply and accelerate global warming. Mitch McConnell alone required 3 different sleighs to carry it all. He sighed. It's been a hard couple of years, and well, you were the last house on the list. How does that make a dash? Claus got shit-faced and passed out in your chimney. Oh, and my arms are too small to reach in there. Have you ever touched a demon? They have hard bristles that rake your skin, sending chills that bounce back and forth along your spine that build on each other without stopping. It smelled like nutmeg, sulfur, and shame. The exoskeleton was cold and warm at the same time. His leg jiggled. Does this make up for what I did to get on the bad list? I asked in a quivering voice. Put your hands into the darkness, and you'll make up for every bad list you've ever been on. I thought of the most shameful things I'd done and shuddered. Then I stuck my hand up the flue. I felt fingers and a face. You know what you have to do, Creature whispered. I grabbed one clammy finger, found his nostril, and touched them to one another. Then I pulled his nose downward, forcing him to nod. The force knocked me back, sending me sliding along the floor. I looked up, gasping, to see that the monstrous leg had disappeared. Is he gone? Creature smiled, reflecting broken, yellow teeth in the moonlight. The reindeer will get him home safe. He's got a special relationship with them. No one really questions the fact that he named one Vixen and another Cupid. He trailed off. Okay, I heaved, standing on shaky legs. I've done everything you've asked. Will you stop stalking me? Hell no. Well, can I at least be on the good list now? Creature narrowed his eyes at me. Yeah, he sighed. You're on the good list. But we know what you want from Santa. Why is it this thing? My heart thudded in my chest. Are you going to give me a dash? Creature shook his head. Weird as shit, but it's a contractual obligation. So here you go. He snapped his fingers. An animal appeared next to me, floating above the ground. It was completely covered in fluffy white fur and had no legs. One eye blinked at the center of its head. Below that, a small mouth opened to reveal jagged teeth. Holy shit, I read about these in a story and thought they weren't real. I screamed. Creature sighed. They aren't real. Making things that aren't real is a huge strain on the workshop. Remember what I said about the gold-shitting geese? We can't even unionize. I hope this was worth it, man. Anyway, remember that we're always watching. Always. You people use that fear to keep little children in line, which is almost as fucked up as what we do. Remember, you're never safe from the demon that records your actions and sneaks into your house. Seriously, that should haunt you forever. Good night. Fourth story. Every Christmas Eve, a monster challenges me to a game. Growing up, I don't think we had a single moment free of struggle. We were a poor family that couldn't make ends meet most months, living basically day to day as we tried our best to stretch my father's income until the next paycheck came in. My father, God bless his soul, raised me by himself, and he was a hard-working man throughout his life. Mom died, giving birth to me, her first and only child, and my father refused to remarry and make things easier for him. I only ever loved one woman. He told me when we talked about it once I reached adulthood. That's not something you can replace. I'll take those feelings with me to the grave. Being the sole breadwinner in the house was a tall order to have to step up to. He was barely ever home, away for various jobs even during the weekends. In a sense, I sort of raised myself now that I think about it. But his absence never made me despise my father or grow distant towards him. Quite the opposite, in fact. It made the few precious moments we got to share mean even more to me. Some of those moments were during holidays like Easter or Christmas, when he didn't work. We lived out in the boonies in a small house that he inherited when Grandpa passed away, a cramped but comfortable place that was just the right size for the two of us. It was also close to the wilderness, so my father would go out hunting for meat every once in a while. Don't question me on his methods or the legality of his actions. I can't answer either. Truth is, I never knew or cared. All that mattered was that he filled the fridge and kept me fed without having to spend a dime from our already limited budget. I grew up mostly on venison and wild rabbit. Pork and especially beef were a rarity. He tried to teach me from a young age, to impart his knowledge onto me, but I wasn't an eager learner. I had no problem with eating cute forest critters, I just couldn't hunt them and kill them myself. But my father still tried, taking me out on a few hunting trips with him and our old dog. Charles, my father's companion into the wilderness, wasn't a pure breed, of course. Just an old mutt that my father rescued from a shelter. But he was big and had a keen sense of smell despite his age, so he was a huge help in tracking down prey. The few times I saw him in action, I was impressed. One such instance comes to mind right away. The three of us, Charles, my father, and I, were out looking for a deer on a chilly autumn day. We found tracks and followed them until we spotted the deer, but my father missed the shot and scared it away. Charles ran after it when the deer bolted, and we ran after the dog to not lose him. He led us on a wild chase through the forest for a few minutes, but we finally caught up to him on the banks of a river that crisscrossed the trees. "What's he doing?" I asked my father when we saw Charles pacing back and forth on the edge of the whirling waters. "The deer probably jumped in and got swept by the current," my father answered. "The water washed away the scent trail, so Charles is confused." We followed the river downstream, and true enough, we found the deer's carcass. Charles strutted over to it victoriously, giving us a good laugh. We had venison steak for dinner that night, and my father made sure to give Charles a big, juicy cut for his troubles. Anyways, my story takes place in that home when I was about 8 years old. Despite our shaky financial situation, my father always tried to make the holiday season special for me. He could never afford fancy gifts like Game Boys, for example, when those were hot, but his gestures never went unappreciated. We mostly painted eggs together for Easter or went out hiking before Christmas to find nice trees we could fell and bring home to decorate. But that particular Christmas hadn't gone down as planned. A few months beforehand, Dad fell ill, and his condition worsened until he was left bedridden. He didn't want to go see a doctor right away, saying that he only needed to rest, but he eventually relented. After a round of tests, the doctors told him the one thing that nobody wants to hear. He had pancreatic cancer, and it already started spreading to other organs. All cancers are nasty, ugly affairs, but the pancreatic kind is especially vile. It gives nearly no symptoms until it is too late to do something about it. And that was the case for my father. Even with treatment, the doctors said that his chances for survival were slim at best. But my father refused treatment, so they predicted his death to happen sometime around New Year's. The news devastated him, though he shielded me from them to the best of his ability. I only found out about it later, when I was older. As it stood, I only knew that he was sick. Being a young kid that thought of his father as a permanent part of their life, the thought that he might die never even occurred to me. But he deteriorated visibly each day, until a neighbor had to come over every so often to help him out with the most basic tasks. Why not someone from our family, you might ask? Simple. We had few living relatives, and the ones we did have were deadbeats, never giving a crap about us except when they needed to borrow money. They wouldn't have helped take care of a sick man, and they definitely wouldn't have taken me in after my father's passing. "Listen, Nico," Dad told me one December evening after calling me into his bedroom. "I'll be very sick for a while. I might never get better." His voice was weak and raspy, and I could tell that he had difficulty getting those few words out. "You will. I protested. Maybe, he relented. But until that happens, you'll need to go and live with someone else that can take care of you. I don't want to, I said, stomping my foot down. I know, he admitted, a few tears forming around his eyes. But you have to do it. For me, okay? I almost cried myself, though it was more out of frustration than anything else. I didn't understand the severity of our predicament back then. Turning around, I found the neighbor in the doorway, with tears in her eyes as well. She was an older lady living all by herself some 15 minutes away, the closest person to us out here. Her name was Daisy, and she'd always been kind to me, giving me homemade sweets and pocket money whenever me and Dad went over to help her out with small chores. She'd been the closest thing I had to a grandma growing up. Miss Daisy made some arrangements, Dad said after a short pause. Some nice people will come by after Christmas, and you'll have to go with them, okay? I didn't stay around to listen anymore. I ran out of the room, bawling my eyes out. Daisy yelled after me, trying to stop me, but I couldn't. I didn't want to live with someone else. I wanted to stay with my dad. After I got outside, I made my way to my usual spot where I played most days. A dingy little tree house that Dad built for me a couple of summers back, but I loved the place to death. I climbed up into it to hide, having no plans to actually run away from home. I simply wanted to be alone for a while, in a place where Daisy couldn't reach me to drag me back inside. I heard her calling for me for quite some time, but she eventually relented and went home for the night. But I spent the night wide awake up in the treehouse, looking over the forest as I tried to think of a way to solve our problems. I didn't have any money, and with Christmas right around the corner and me being a child, I couldn't earn it fast enough either. So any ideas involving doctors or payment in general were out first. I wasn't particularly religious either, so prayer never even crossed my mind. Santa, I decided after every other solution went nowhere. He always brought me what I wanted. I'll ask him to make Dad better as my Christmas present. Not a bad plan, so long as you believed in Santa, of course, which at that young age I still did. In my mind, it was foolproof, a 100% guaranteed chance of success. I'd been a good boy all year. I helped out and never misbehaved, so Santa would have to give me the present I wanted. After that plan was hatched, I went back inside and went to bed. No point in ruining my good boy streak. The next day, I woke up first thing in the morning, got my dad's handsaw, and ventured out into the woods all by my lonesome. With him being bedridden, we hadn't gone hunting for a Christmas tree that year. But we needed one for Santa, didn't we? That we did, and I decided to take the matter into my own hands. I spent all morning and a good chunk of the afternoon searching, until I found a fir that I considered good enough. Don't ask me the exact species. I have no idea. Back then they were all Christmas trees to me. Anyway, I got it down all by myself, which proved to be a much more difficult task than I had expected. I got tangled in the branches as I tried to reach its trunk. I received plenty of scratches, nearly poked out one of my eyes at some point. But I succeeded, and I dragged it back home victoriously. Where were you? Daisy scolded when I entered the house. She'd returned while I was away, and she was ready to give me an earful for my outburst. Your father was worried sick for you. I let her scold me to her heart's content, apologized, and brought the tree inside. Dad was impressed with me, and he all but dragged himself out of bed to help me set up the tree. I realized in the meantime that he hoped to spend one final Christmas with me, to give me some heartwarming memories to hold on to when he'd be gone, but at that moment I didn't consider it. I simply had fun carrying out our usual Christmas routine. We didn't have much to hang on the branches, no fancy lights and candles and whatnot, just the same old tinsel and baubles that we reused ever since I could remember. But the tree still turned out stunning, and it was made even better for me by the fact that I went out and got it myself. I behaved after that. waiting for the days to pass one by one. Dad got visibly worse with each one, to the point where he needed to be spoon-fed and couldn't get up to use the bathroom. But I still held out hope, convinced that once Christmas came, Santa would give me my present. It felt like years waiting for the 24th to arrive, but it swung around eventually. I stayed up waiting, knowing full well that I wasn't supposed to do that. After all, Santa skipped houses if the kids inside didn't sleep. But I wanted to meet him and ask him my wish face to face to make sure that it would come true. Evening came and passed, night settled outside, and I pretended to go to sleep after we ate dinner and Daisy left. As soon as I was sure that Dad was asleep, I got up and made my way to the living room on my toes. With no place to really hide in the small room, I got behind the Christmas tree and waited. My hope was that the darkness would hide me for long enough until Santa came in. The only clock in the house was on the opposite wall, in full view but barely visible. I watched the seconds ticking away into minutes, seeing 10 p.m. turn to 11. It was quite the ordeal to stand and wait for that long, but I was determined. I nearly fell asleep at one point, but 11:59 rolled around, and that sobered me up real good. I held my breath as I watched the sweep hand going, until it reached the last second before midnight. Then it got stuck, refusing to transition into midnight. Did the battery run out? I wondered. At any rate, I thought no big deal of it. Just because the clock stopped didn't mean that midnight wouldn't come. I waited for a few seconds, for Santa to come down the admittedly small chimney. But as the seconds turned into a minute, I started to worry. Did he figure me out? Did I undo all of my goodness with this one stunt? Did he skip our house? I got out from behind the tree, walking out in the open as my worry turned to panic. I'd blown it. No, I whispered with desperation. No, please. I'm sorry, please. The words got stuck in my throat when I heard something from outside. The sound of skittering feet approaching the house from the surrounding woods, tapping on the walls as something climbed to the roof. Santa came after all, and I waited for him with bated breath. The sounds of his rushing feet reached the roof. Then they stopped. I looked at the chimney intently, backing away slowly to give him room. Something scraped against the bricks and mortar, giving off a bristly sound. And before long, I saw a face emerge from the fireplace. Two beady black eyes came into view first, scanning the room from side to side and settling on me. The rest of his head followed, looking like silly putty being forced through a tube. My wonder turned to terror as he advanced little by little, revealing a thin, centipede-like body with many small legs. After it was done, and he was fully in the room with me, he stared at me for what felt like hours. His mouth contorted into a twisted grin, the corners of his lips cracking and spreading until they reached his ears. Hundreds of tiny, needle-sharp teeth peered at me from inside his maw, yellowed and blasted with decay. "What are you doing up so late, child?" It questioned, bringing me out of my stupefaction. "You should be sleeping." I'm waiting for Santa," I stuttered in answer. Are you him? "You shouldn't be waiting for Santa," he answered. "That makes you a naughty boy." "I'm sorry," I mumbled, on the verge of tearing up. "But I wanted—" "Let me guess," he said in a bored tone. "You wanted to ask for a specific gift? What would it be? A new bicycle? Toys?" "Make Daddy feel better. He's sick," I said with conviction. "That's the only present I want." He raised an eyebrow hearing that and scurried closer to me. His long body coiled, surrounding me as his beady eyes examined me. The color in my face drained, and it took all I had to keep from screaming and running away. "Very well," he answered. "Let us see your father." I might be able to offer you what you wish for." He pulled away, allowing me to lead him to Dad's bedroom. I did so, opening the door slowly to reveal the dark room. Dad was in his bed sleeping, so Santa followed me inside. He pushed himself up, holding his spindly body above Dad with only a couple of hind legs. "He does look sick," he admitted. One of his front limbs reached down, touching Dad's forehead. "Very sick. But I can help." "Then do it, please," I whispered. "I will, but only if you play a game with me," he answered. "If you beat me at it, I'll cure your father." And if I lose?" I asked, scared by the prospect. "That's a surprise you'll have to find out," he answered and gave me another grin that sent chills down my spine. I wanted to refuse, but seeing Dad in that state broke my heart. He'd done so much for me over the years that I couldn't let him down now when he needed me. "What's the game?" I asked. "You've been a good little boy all year, so I'll let you choose," he said. I thought it over for a bit, trying to decide what game I was best at. I didn't know a lot of them, so my options were limited, but I eventually settled on one. "Hide and seek," I answered. His grin grew a bit wider hearing that. "Okay," he said with satisfaction. "I'll do the seeking. You'll do the hiding. If I can't find you for 10 minutes, you win. Is that good?" "Yes," I answered, already thinking of potential hiding spots. "Great. I'll count to 100, so scurry off and hide." He turned to face the wall and started counting out loud, so I bolted out of the room and left the house entirely. As tempting as it was to hide inside, I figured it would be the first place he'd look for me. My best chance was to get as far away as possible before he started searching. The moment I got outside, I was taken aback by what I found. It was snowing pretty heavily only minutes prior, but now the bulky flakes were suspended in midair. There was no wind, no sound, no movement whatsoever, like the world itself paused for our game. It looked and felt surreal. Hearing the creature counting loudly inside, I blocked all of it out and continued running. I counted down from 100 in my head as I went, and I got pretty far away from home in that time. I hoped to make it to the treehouse, but it was too far away, so I dove into some bushes instead. Without anything on me to tell time, I had to approximate as I waited for the 10 minutes to pass. I think it was 2 minutes in by the time he left the house as well. I could see his monstrous figure leaving through the front door in the moon's pale light, but something was different. He moved faster, more erratically, his head turning from side to side in search of me. I thought he didn't know about the treehouse, but I was wrong. He scurried past the bushes I was hiding in, going right for it. I caught a glimpse of his face when he passed by, and his expression petrified me. He looked scary before, but now he looked downright terrifying, the grin on his lips more evil than I thought possible. He really wanted to catch me. I saw him reaching the treehouse, climbing up with little effort. He pushed his body inside through the window, breaking some of the planks apart in the process. When he didn't find me up there, he let out an angry screech and started tearing the treehouse to shreds. I saw pieces of it flying as he thrashed about inside, until all that was left was a devastated husk. When he was done, he climbed down and looked at the forest for a few tense moments. I started realizing just how dire my situation was, so I retreated further into the darkness. But before I did, I saw his face contorting as something bubbled to the surface of his skin between his eyes. A deformed snout formed out of his flesh, and he started sniffing the air with it. I didn't wait to see if he'd find me, knowing full well that he would. Instead, I got out of the bushes on the other side and ran away deeper into the forest. I estimated that maybe 5 minutes had passed, so I had 5 more to go. The sounds of his feet rushing after me came from behind, so I forced myself to run even faster. With hiding out of the question, I had to find a way to escape him for long enough. The way Charles tracked down prey, using his sense of smell, came to mind, so I knew I needed to erase my scent somehow. The river, I decided, remembering how that deer managed to escape Charles and his nose. I ran into its general direction, deeper and deeper into the woods, and I eventually came across it. Luckily for me, it wasn't entirely frozen over. I stepped out on the treacherous ice until I felt it cracking beneath my feet, so I shot a sole at it and broke it. I fell into the freezing water, feeling it pushing all of the air out of my lungs as it seeped into my clothes and invaded my skin. It was frigid, and thermal shock or hypothermia were very real dangers. But they didn't worry me much at that moment. In fact, they barely crossed my mind. My only goal was to escape the horrific creature that was after me. The current pushed me under the ice and carried me along on its underside, scraping me against the jagged edges that had formed. I got scratched and bruised. Sensation left the tips of my fingers and feet as the cold worked its way into my flesh, and my lungs burned for air. The ordeal didn't last for long, but it was excruciating. Half a minute later at most, the current spat me out of another break in the ice. I clung to it, trying in vain to drag myself out as I panted heavily. Prying my eyes open, I could barely make out the spot upstream where I jumped in. The creature reached it and paused, sniffing the air as puffs of steam left his nostrils. He looked around in confusion, so I ducked back down into the waters. Despite the heavy price I paid, my plan worked. Coming back up to the surface, I saw him crossing the river and continuing deeper into the woods. As the few minutes left of our game passed, I just waited, holding on for dear life. Worry finally overtook me as the dire nature of my situation set in. I would win, but I would freeze to death in the process, as I didn't have the strength to pull myself out of the river. And even if I did get out, I'd die on my way home to exposure. Wet to the bone as I was, and with the temperature outside well into the negatives, the air itself would do me in. I was starting to slip away into unconsciousness when I noticed the snowflakes begin to fall to the ground again. That was a clear signal that the game was over, so I started screaming, "Help! Please help me!" My voice, although weak, carried far and wide through the night. I kept calling out, and soon enough I heard the creature barreling towards me through the forest. He emerged from between the trees, with a wide frown on his face that turned to a grin when he saw me. "You're quite resourceful, Nicholas," he said as he approached the river. "I must commend you for that, and for defeating me." He stepped on the ice, and I expected his huge body to break it easily. But it didn't. The ice didn't as much as crack under his enormous weight. One of his appendages came up, and he pointed it my way for me to grab it. I did, and he effortlessly lifted me out of the water. "Now hold on tight. We have to get you to shelter right away," he said as he put me on his back. I got my arms around his throat, and he galloped through the forest with the same amazing speed he had displayed before. If not for the circumstances I was in, I might have enjoyed the bumpy, fast-paced ride. In no time at all, we were back home, and I went inside to change and warm up. "You'll get a nasty cold tomorrow, but you will live," he told me. "And your father will as well. You won, so I will see to my end of our agreement." He went to Dad's room with me in tow, and he placed his creepy feet along Dad's sleeping form. Color gradually returned to Dad's skin, and he drew in a deep inhale, but he didn't wake up. "There, I have upheld my promise," he said and turned to leave the room. "See you next year, Nicholas, and remember to be a good boy." He then left through the chimney, and I heard him scurrying off back into the forest. True to his word, my father woke up the next morning in perfect health, to everyone's utter shock except my own. I asked Santa to make you better as my gift. I explained to him and Daisy. I tried to tell them more, to go into detail, but I couldn't. And I don't mean that in a corny, oh, I didn't want them to worry way. I literally couldn't. The words wouldn't travel up my throat, no matter how hard I tried to push them out. My father nodded, and a few tears escaped his eyes. Tears of happiness, I thought at the time, but now I'm having doubts. That Christmas was the happiest one in my life, and getting to spend it with my father made me forget my ordeal. Later checkups with the doctors revealed that any trace of cancer was gone from his body, like it was never even there. They questioned him, of course, but that got them nowhere. So they called it a miraculous recovery and left it at that. But my story doesn't end there, unfortunately. For the creature kept its other promise as well, returning year after year on Christmas Eve for us to play again. Just as the first time, it allowed me to choose, and I chose every game under the sun over the years. I'd research and practice them the whole year beforehand, and I never picked games based on luck, just ones based on skill. That allowed me to remain one step ahead and win each and every time, much to the creature's surprise. My father lived a long and healthy life, but he died in the summer of 2020 at 72. I myself am 43 years old, going on 44, and we maintain a close relationship throughout the years. His death was devastating to me, but I found solace in the fact that I delayed it all of those decades ago. But then something else happened, and on the Christmas Eve of 2020, I finally lost my first game with the creature. He grinned widely like he'd done back when he chased me, and I prepared myself to be dragged off to some horrible fate. Instead, he left without saying a word. I don't know if he'll return again this Christmas, but truth be told, I might not live to see the 24th. A couple of months ago, I fell just like my dad had. I made appointments and got checked out, and my worst fear was realized. I was diagnosed with the same cancer that the creature got rid of in my father. Ever since, I've spent my time in and out of chemotherapy as I slowly deteriorated. Even though money is no longer a problem and medical knowledge has advanced so far, I'm still beyond saving. I'm lying on my deathbed now as I write this out, counting the moments, unsure how many of them I have left. But I'm not scared for myself, no. You see, I have a loving wife by my side and 2 young kids of my own, 2 brothers of 7 and 9 years old respectively. 2 amazing yet naive kids that I love like nothing else in this world, and who are as pained to see me in this condition as I was to see my father. So yes, the creature might return this Christmas to play once more, but I worry that this time I won't be one of the players. I've tried talking to my wife and sons about it, but it's just like all of those years ago. The words about the creature won't come out of me. My only hope now is that I'll be 6 feet under come the 24th of December, so that my sins won't be passed down to my sons like they've been passed down to me by my father. I'd gladly take death over waking up healthy on Christmas morning. 5th story. My grandmother always used to tell stories on Christmas Eve. I recall one of them that was extremely bizarre. One of my favorite parts of Christmas Eve when I was a kid was story time. I grew up in a big family, and every year my parents would have the whole gang over. All of my aunts and uncles from both sides of the family, my 8 cousins and my grandparents. Of course, being kids, my cousins and I all thirsted after the gifts that we would see pile up under the Christmas tree like falling snow. But after we had unwrapped our new toys and were completely numb from how much food we had eaten, we would gather around at our grandmother's feet, and she would tell us stories. Grandma was a great storyteller. She always had this twinkle in her eye as she leaned in close and whispered to us, once upon a time. The whole room would fall silent when Grandma spoke. Even the adults in the room would turn their heads to listen to whatever concoction her brain had come up with that year. The multicolored lights from the Christmas tree would twinkle behind her head to match that glimmer in her eye. My grandmother died earlier this year. It's going to be our first Christmas without story time. Even as my cousins and I aged into our teenage years, our parents into their 50s, and our grandparents into their 80s, my grandmother never stopped telling her stories. Christmas this year isn't going to be the same. Recently, I've been reminiscing about Grandma's story time, trying to remember her greatest hits. I've been wanting to remember them as accurately as possible, so that maybe I can make note of what I remember and go from there, so that I can keep the Christmas storytelling tradition going when my cousins and I have children of our own. I've remembered about 7 of Grandma's stories so far, but the reason I'm writing on No Sleep today is because I've remembered another one that she told when I was about 10 years old. This story is a peculiar one, the only bizarre one that Grandma ever told us, and I want to share it with you guys. I don't remember exactly what the title of the story was, but it goes something like this in my own words. What is a child's favorite part of Christmas? The presents, obviously. And after Mommy and Daddy, who do children immediately think of when they think of presents under the tree? Santa Claus, of course. The big man in the bright red suit, jolly laugh, and herd of reindeer to pull him through the snowy night sky as he delivers presents to every good kid around the world. There is not a single child that I know who doesn't get excited when they think about Santa Claus. Good kids get presents and naughty kids get coal. At least every kid gets something. But Santa's challenge isn't just about getting around the whole world in one night and delivering presents. No, he has more to worry about than that. You see, children, Santa doesn't visit every house, but every house gets a visit on Christmas Eve. Not many people know this, but there is another Santa, except, of course, he isn't Santa. Physically, they look more or less the same, except the other Santa doesn't wear a bright red suit. He looks different to every child. He doesn't have a jolly laugh, he just stares. He doesn't drink milk and eat cookies. In fact, he doesn't eat anything. He doesn't have a sled pulled by reindeer, and he doesn't come down the chimney. No, he gets in through the back door or from the basement, and he knows where all the children's rooms are. He never delivers presents, but he does punish the naughty children. How bad the punishment is depends on how bad you've been that year. He can make children very sick. Some children visited by him have had the stomach flu that lasted 2 weeks where they nearly died from dehydration. There are some accounts of some children whose pets or parents just vanished in the middle of the night, never to be heard of or seen again. In the more extreme cases, some naughty children have had their houses burnt down, losing everything and everyone in it except themselves. My grandmother had heard of this boy named Bobby, who lived a few towns over from her growing up. He was visited by the other Santa one year on Christmas Eve. According to what she had heard from the neighbors, Bobby had woken up in the middle of the night because his dog was whimpering, and he had the worst pain in his foot. Getting up to go see what was wrong with Baxter, he fell face down as soon as his feet hit the floor because, well, all of his toes had been cut off. You could tell whoever did it probably used a saw because of the tendrils of skin and shattered pieces of bone that were sticking out of where his toes used to be. There was blood all over his sheets. Bobby screamed and screamed, and his dog's whimpering just kept getting louder and louder. Bobby couldn't take the sound, and despite his pain, he managed to drag himself across the floor all the way over to the kitchen, where his dog was. When he found him, his screams just kept coming. Baxter was kneeling in the corner of the kitchen, where he also saw his father, sobbing and holding a baseball bat, crouched beside the body of his mother. Her teeth were scattered all over the floor, and her face was pulpy with blood and bone. She twitched incessantly on the floor while Bobby's father sobbed. His dog whimpered, and Bobby screamed. But how did you know who was going to be visiting you on Christmas Eve? Santa or the other Santa? You didn't, Grandma said. If you've been naughty, you better pray and pray and pray that all you received that year was coal and not a horrible sickness or a dead family or missing body parts. Although I don't remember the story exactly as Grandma told it, there is one thing I remember that she said once the story was done, which was a bizarre thing for her to say since we were all so young. I also remembered she had made sure story time this year was told in a room where the rest of the adults couldn't hear her tale. Why do you think Santa and Satan sound almost exactly the same? Sixth story, the Christmas season. 3 years before I was born, my mother and father had their first child. He lived for a mere 7 minutes before his breathing stopped and he died. I have never inquired as to what caused him to stop breathing. A little over a year after this terrible incident, my parents had a daughter, and then 2 years after her, I was born. Naturally, my parents had no reason to tell me about my older brother when I was younger. And even as we all got older, the story was never told to me, presumably because it was too painful to recall. If the following events had never occurred, I might have never found out about him at all. In early December during my junior year of high school, the family gathered round the Christmas tree to load it up with the ornaments we had gathered over the years. Our family had continued to grow after my birth. My parents had added another son and daughter. My parents had bought each of us an ornament each year. So after adding those to the stockpile that they had owned before we were born, we always had one hell of a time fitting all of the ornaments onto the tree. This year was no different, but we pushed and we slid and shoved and eventually found some green for all of them. In addition to the ornaments, we had a fairly nice manger set that was placed underneath the tree. It had the whole damn birth party, and of course contained a wooden crib in which the figurine of baby Jesus lay. After my siblings and I had set this up, we stood for a minute or two and admired our work, and then we each went our separate ways and on with life. A day after setting the tree up, I walked into the living room to find one of my ornaments on the ground. It was the first ornament that had been given to me and had firstborn son etched into its face. The bright bronze had become cloudy over the years, but the ornament was sentimental, so it always managed to find a prominent place on the tree. I found the spot I thought it had fallen from and rehung it before walking through the room. I passed through the room the next day to find the ornament again on the ground, and again I hung it up. I tried to hang it in a different spot this time, assuming the weight had allowed it to slide from a thin branch, but to no avail, as it was on the ground the following day as well. I placed it back on the tree, and was not too surprised when I came in the next day to find the ornament missing from the spot. What did surprise me, however, was that the ornament was not on the ground, but was instead sitting on the coffee table a few feet away. I assumed my mother was having the same problem with the ornament and had just given up and placed it on the table, so I stopped in the kitchen to ask her about it. She was doing the dishes, and when I asked, she turned around and with a funny look on her face and told me that she too had been picking the ornament up each time she walked into the room. For the next few days, each time I walked into the room, I continued to find the ornament off of the tree. But now the location had changed. It was no longer lying in random spots on the floor or on the table like it had been before. Each time I walked in the room now, the ornament was inside of the roof manager, leaning against the crib with the Jesus figure. I was young, and I'm sure that didn't help prevent me from thinking that things were adding up a little strangely. It seems really stupid now, but I grew up in a semi-religious family, and something about finding my firstborn son ornament leaning against Jesus every day appeared to me to be a harbinger of something evil that would cometh my way. The non-surprising thing is nothing ever happened to me. Obvious, I suppose. But my dad, my no-nonsense, get out of my face with your stupid paranormal bullshit, I'm just going to go into this scary dark room to get the toolbox. Mysterious moaning be damned. Had something happened to him? He tended to work in his basement office until the wee hours of the morning. Most of that time was actually filled with him sleeping in his chair, as evidenced by him springing up and feigning awareness every time I would go into the basement late at night. In the early hours of the morning of December 23rd, he was, as usual, down in the basement. Around 2 a.m., he was awakened by footsteps crossing down the first floor hallway above his head. He decided he would come up and see who was up, and then continue upstairs to bed. As he came up the basement stairs, he could hear the person walking through the kitchen on the other side of the door, but when he opened it, the person had just crossed into the dining room. He followed the steps through the kitchen and around the bend, but again was too late. The footsteps had beat him around the turn and into the living room. He rounded the corner and was surprised to see an empty room and no longer hear the footsteps. From the other room, they had appeared to stop at the Christmas tree. As he stood there, scanning the space and trying to figure out what he had heard, he noticed an object lying on the ground towards the middle of the room. As he walked up to it and started bending over, he realized there were actually two objects lying in the middle of the living room floor: baby Jesus and the firstborn son ornament that was lying against his side. The next day, my dad told all of us the story at breakfast. My parents must have known that I was feeling a little unsettled from it all, so they decided to finally tell me what they had kept a secret for 16 years. They told me about their happiness at getting pregnant, the 9 long and exciting months my mom had carried my brother, and their feeling of complete desolation and absolute loss when he died. They told me how it still hurt, especially around the holidays. At first, I assumed this was because everyone becomes sentimental around the holidays. Then they told me the real reason. My brother had been born and died on December 23rd at 2 a.m. Last night had been the 20th anniversary of his death. 7th story. I hate Christmas after this happened. This happened to me when I was 13. I always used to love the holidays, especially Christmas. I guess because I love getting gifts like every other kid. Don't judge me, but I come from a wealthy family. We live in a beautiful 2-level 5-bedroom, 6-bathroom home on Long Island, New York. My sister and I go to a private school, and we take several vacations a year. Yes, we are spoiled. My parents both work high-paying jobs doing who knows what, but it brings in money, so who cares? What happened on Christmas Eve, when I was 13, really made me dread the holidays. I still have nightmares about it. This is my scary Christmas story. On December 21st, it was my sister Julie's birthday. She turned 9. Because it was so close to Christmas, my parents did not spoil her too much. So they just gave her Robux, like $100 worth of Robux. She was very happy and held on to the money until Christmas Eve. We always have family and my parents' friends come over on the eve for dinner and a party. Myself and Julie would stay in our rooms and just watch movies and play video games. Why would we want to hang out with family and their friends anyway? On Christmas Eve, at 6 p.m., they all came over dressed up in their best holiday threads. The women in their sparkly red and green gowns, and the men in their black and white tuxes. As Julie and I were in my room playing Roblox, we heard all the chatter, the laughter, and the clinking of fancy wine glasses. All seemed typical until we heard a loud scream from one of the guests. It sounded like a scream right out of a slasher movie. Julie and I jumped. What the hell was that? I asked her, like she would know. She said, that sounded like Aunt Dee. We just looked at each other in terror. I decided because I was older, I would go check things out. I slowly opened the bedroom door and walked towards the staircase leading to the living room, where the party was being held. Julie just peeked her head out the bedroom door and watched me, her eyes as big as saucers. She put her finger on her lips to tell me to be quiet. I looked down the stairs, and at the bottom of the steps was a pool of blood. Red blood! There was a commotion, and it sounded like people were panicking. They were asking each other what they should do. I ran into the kitchen where my parents were, and I asked what happened. Who was hurt? My mother was just staring out into the backyard. She did not answer me. My father told me to get back upstairs. I demanded an answer. I mean, are we safe? Did someone break in and hurt one of the guests? Did you call the cops? Get upstairs, my father yelled. I ran like my life depended on it. I ran into my bedroom, locked the door, and grabbed Julie to stay close to me. We were confused and scared, our hands shaking. I asked Julie if she thought I should call 911 or just wait and see. She told me to call them now. Crap, my phone is downstairs. Give me yours. Julie ran into her room and got me her phone. As I was calling 911, our father came into our room and saw me. He told me to put the phone down. Do not call anyone. I told him I was calling for help. Why can't I call? He told us he was dealing with it. Just stay in the room. He looked very stressed, and he actually scared us with how intense he was being. We obeyed him. Once he left our room, we waited a few minutes, and I decided to go downstairs again to try and hear what they were doing. I will always regret making that decision. So I told Julie to stay in the bedroom and close the door. As I slowly walked down the steps and into the living room, I saw only 4 people huddled in a circle, whispering. The circle included my parents, our Aunt Dee, and Uncle Rob. I ran into the kitchen and saw a trail of blood leading out the back door. My heart started to race, my hands were sweating, and I was frozen in place. I walked towards the back door and tried to see what was out there. I was hoping and praying it was from an animal, but I knew better. I walked out the door and followed the trail of blood. As I got near the end of the trail, I saw it. I couldn't believe it. What was supposed to be a fun, festive annual holiday party turned into a murder mystery I was trying to solve. Who was this person? I couldn't even tell if it was a male or female. The blood, the stab marks. I heard the back door open, so I ran behind the shed to hide. The group of 4 came out, and they stood over the body to discuss what to do with it. They kept saying, "No police, what happened here tonight stays here." Once they agreed, my father backed his truck into the backyard, and they loaded it up into the bed of what used to be my favorite truck. While 3 of the murderers left in the truck, my mother started burying the evidence, including the murder weapon. I came out of hiding and approached my mother. I asked her what happened. "Please tell me." She started to cry and told me they had to kill our 40-year-old neighbor, Tim. I asked her why. He was always so nice to us. She said yes, because he liked Julie and had pictures of her on his phone. His bedroom window faced Julie's bedroom. The pictures on his phone showed Julie changing clothes, and some included her walking home from school. The group accidentally saw the pictures when Tim was showing them pictures of his family. Julie's happened to be in the mix of photos. When my father saw the pictures, he snapped, grabbed the carving knife from the dinner table, and stabbed Tim multiple times. Obviously, if they called the police, my dad would go to prison, so they decided to bury Tim's body out in the woods where he would not be found. 8th story. I had to break up with my boyfriend on Christmas Eve. I'm sure you'll agree when you hear the story. That Christmas Eve, I was excited to visit my new boyfriend Jack's parents. I had grown attached to Jack in the few months we had been dating, and his parents, whom I had met once before, seemed gentle, kind, somewhat sad from the tragedy of losing their other child, a daughter, a few years ago to cancer. But perhaps I only thought this because Jack had mentioned his deceased sister a few times in passing. Jack had bought me a new dress for Christmas. Odd, I thought, but then perhaps I had watched Vertigo too many times and saw too much about gender and feminism online. It was beautiful, with an unusual dark green and red pattern which perfectly brought out the highlights of my chestnut hair. Jack's eyes lit up when he saw me twirling around in it, and he said he couldn't wait for his parents to see me. We entered their suburban home, and Jack helped me take off my winter coat while his parents made polite noises at us, which were cut short when they laid eyes on me. His mother's eyes welled up, and clapping her hand to her mouth, she left the hallway. I looked up at Jack. He was smiling. "Mom," he called. His father frowned, but then remembered his manners and turned to me. "Come inside, my dear. You should have a drink now that you're here. Did Jack never tell you?" His voice trailed off. I followed his dad into the brightly lit living room, and suddenly I understood. For hanging on the wall was a full-length photo portrait of a young woman with Jack's features and rich chestnut hair, wearing the same beautiful red and green dress I had on. I turned to Jack angrily. How could he play such a mean trick on us, on me, on his parents? But when I saw his face, my anger turned to fear at the fixed look on his face. He came up to me and took my hands, looking deeply in my eyes. "Please, sweetheart, don't be mad," he beseeched. "They're always so sad at Christmas, always going on and on about Lucy. She was their favorite, you know. I thought you might cheer them up." His grip tightened, and the feelings of fear and confusion deepened. I looked at his parents helplessly. They were seated on the couch, his father's arms around his mother's slumping shoulders while she dabbed at her eyes. They looked so frail and ill. What were they thinking? "Please, darling, let's just have dinner. They prepared a real feast for us. All the things you like. Just for a couple of hours," murmured Jack. Was it social conditioning? Was it survival? My skin crawling, I dumbly nodded. Jack turned to his parents. "Mom, Dad, we're starving. Is dinner ready?" he said brightly. Mom got up, visibly pulling herself together. "We have nibbles in here. Where are your manners, John? Offer them drinks," she scolded her husband. Jack's dad turned to me. "What would you like, my dear?" Drinks in hand, the atmosphere relaxed, and Jack started chattering. "I love the photos you put up, Mom. Where did you even find these? This is our last ski trip together, right? Lucy was such a champ. Do you remember when He turned to me mid-flow. "Dad won medals in skiing, you know. State championships. And Lucy took right after him." His father beamed, and their last vestiges of courtesy towards me gave way to their obvious desire to talk about their daughter. They reminisced enthusiastically about their family vacations, gesturing to what seemed like the hundreds of photos, all in glinting silver and gilt frames on the walls. "Of course I could never ski like her," I heard Jack say, "and Lucy baked with Mom." "Oh, Jack, are you still not over it?" his mom responded almost playfully. My phone vibrated. Discreetly, I pulled it out, thanking God that Lucy had had the good sense to wear a dress with pockets. A single work from an unknown sender. "Leave." "Who is it, darling?" called Jack, looking over his shoulder, interrupting himself in a deep analysis of whether he or Lucy were more popular in high school. I shook my head. "It must be spam," I said lightly, smiling at his mom. I looked at the photo over her head, and it was of Lucy doing some kind of school presentation. She looked directly at me. I felt slightly dizzy. The wine, the PowerPoint slide in the photo shimmered, and the word was clear: leave. Lucy seemed to nod. The voices rose and swirled around me. "I need to use the bathroom," I said. His mom showed me the guest bathroom, thankfully next to the front door. I went in, and as soon as she left, I slipped out and opened the door. "Are you leaving us?" Jack's father was at the other end of the hallway, looking straight at me. I stared back, opening and closing my mouth. Suddenly, there was huge crash from inside the living room. Glimpsing through, I saw the full-length photo of Lucy in dress fallen to the floor. Distracted, Jack's father turned, and I heard the startled cries of Jack and his mom. I didn't wait any longer. Grabbing my coat, I fled into the night. Thanks a lot for watching till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail for more upcoming videos.